What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up, peeps? What is going on, peeps? Do me a favor and drop some comments. Let me do something here for real quick, actually. All right, here we go. Drop some comments. Drop some comments in the chat. Drop some comments in the chat. If you are here, drop some comments. Got some serious wind going on here. All right. What's up? What's up, Ben? How's it going, my man? Drop some comments if you're here. Spread the word. Spread the word. Hope we got the COVID cabal on right now. Once we get to 30 people, we'll start going into it. Drop some comments if you're watching. Going to be very, very interesting today. Very interesting little chat we're going to have here. If you guys are watching, drop a comment. Almost there. Just a few more. It's a few more people. And we'll be rolling. Thomas, good to see you again. Yeah, I think it was after the news yesterday. I was feeling like, all right, I gotta do one. But like I said, I think we're probably doing one about once a week now. Maybe maybe twice a week, depending on what happens. Things are moving pretty fast, guys. It's moving quite rapid at this point. Just gotta acknowledge that. So the main things to talk about here is going to be the recent revelations about. It's going to be a short COVID cabal. We're not going to go too long today. But the revelations of these WMDs actually acknowledged by the Russian ministry itself. And Roman Lucky, it's good to see you guys. Actually acknowledged by the Russian Ministry of Defense itself. And we're going to be talking about what comes next. So a lot of the stuff we've already talked about, you guys have been following along. But the stuff that happened with the Russian Ministry of Defense talking about there being like nukes at Chernobyl, that they were working on nuclear weapons, this has thrown a lot of people off. And look, I think it's reasonable. I think everybody, if they're being reasonable, they're not going to come into this information and think, oh, it's automatically true. There's no reason, like, you can't trust any government, you can't trust any intelligence agency report. You just can't do it. Russia's FSB is saying that there's nuclear weapons in Ukraine. You can't just take those statements and say that's truth, that's what's going to happen, because intelligence agencies lie. However, there's a couple of reasons to think about why this might be true. Okay, the first reason is that I know people might get upset about me for saying this, but by and large, the Russians haven't been lying about what's been going on in the war. By and large, they haven't been lying about what's been going on in the war. They haven't been lying about their casualties. They haven't been lying about what they've taken, what they haven't taken. It's been, you have a couple of minor PR pieces they put out there, which is to be expected, but they're not PR is different than fabrications, right? You can emphasize a good interaction between a Chechnyan soldier and a child. That's not a lie. If you say you took out 30 Russian helicopters and overran their forces in a location when neither of those Russian forces in a location, when neither of those things happened, those are lies. And the reality is that Ukrainian media has pretty much been, and Colonel McGregor said this himself on Fox News, they've everything that Ukraine puts out, with few exceptions, is pretty much debunked within 24 to 48 hours. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. Okay, we'll talk about Ukrainian Western media in a moment, but Bob, as you're putting right here, that U.S. reports that Russia put out 100% of their troops. They're being misleading, Bob. So what they're saying is that they have now deployed 100% of the troops that they had set aside for the invasion. And I'm not sure if that's true even, but that's what they're referring to, because there's been gradually more and more of them put into the field. The deployed manpower in Ukraine is, I think, about 20% of Russia's actual manpower. But so they'll say they deployed 100% of their troops. Well, it's like saying, yes, I deployed 100% of 20% of my troops. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. Because in the first days of the war, they had only deployed 15 to 20% of that 20%. So there was 60% reserves. Anyway, the point is that we can talk about Ukrainian propaganda and Western propaganda. I mean, maybe probably will. We probably will get back into that. But the point here is that Russia has been pretty honest with their reporting of things. So far, pretty honest about the reporting of things. And so it begs the question, you have to think about, why would they lie? Why would they lie about this stuff being true? You could say, well, it's for domestic consumption, because if the Russian population then sees nukes, they're going to be even more in support of the war. But the reality is that the Russian population was already pretty much in support of the war anyway, especially as the West has been putting sanctions on Russia. What would be dangerous for the regime would be to lie to their population about something that big and to have it get out. Now, maybe you could say, well, how is the information going to get out to the Russians? And, probably there's a lot of truth to that. But even thinking on just a global PR standpoint, Russia right now is okay because they have been able to explain in very reasoned terms, and frankly, their diplomatic posture is very, very reasonable. I mean, what were they trying to demand from Ukraine in the last round of negotiations? They want Crimea recognized as being part of Russia. They want the Donbass recognized as independent republics. And they want confirmation that they want a constitutional change in Ukraine, that Ukraine is going to be neutral. Okay, now you could say about the territorial stuff, blah, blah, blah. But at this point, I mean, they've lost that territory anyway. And if you were dealing with reasonable people who wanted to preserve their country, then, something as simple as we just want you to be neutral, you'd think that would be under consideration, but actually that's one of the big ones that they balk at. They refuse to be neutral. The point here is that not that that's really all that Russia wants. Personally, I think that Russia is going to take most, if not all, of Ukraine, either annexing parts of it or putting the rest into a puppet regime. I heard some things interesting recently during Putin's pre-invasion speech when he said, if you want decommunization, well, why only go part way? We'll show you what it means to fully decommunize Ukraine. Was that a veiled reference to the Ukrainian borders that were set up by the communists? Could have very well been that. So that may mean some kind of statement of saying that, yeah, we'll basically reduce Ukraine down to what it was before Lenin set up that Ukrainian SSR. At any rate, I say that because I don't believe that the Russians only want, at this point, now that they've committed to action, that they only want Ukraine as neutral. But they understand that the regime is not going to accept their demands, and so it's important for them to be reasonable, okay? Because it's other countries around the world like India and China, the BRICS, right? Brazil, African countries, the Middle East, that these countries then look at what's going on. They say, you know what? Russia's position is pretty reasonable. And if you go to Chinese media, from what I understand, the Chinese social media is rabidly in favor of Russia and Russia in the situation. And look, let's be honest, guys. Russia's position is pretty reasonable. It's a pretty logical position. Okay, so we put all this stuff out there, right? So what advantage does Russia have to say that the West was going to produce nukes in Ukraine if that wasn't true, if that's an outright lie? That's a really dangerous thing to say, because when you go and you say, and you're already getting a big Western PR push against you, the West is doing everything they can to alienate you. Russia's now the most sanctioned country in the world. They're doing everything they possibly can to alienate you from the global stage. Your only way of really being able to maintain diplomatic support is to have a really honest, reasonable position. And so if you start making crazy claims like that, like they're making nukes in Chernobyl and they were using the radiation in Chernobyl to hide what they were doing, you run the risk of massive international backlash. However, if it is true and you seed it and you gradually release more and more information, this can be a complete collapse on the West. Russia also has to be careful because they go and they talk about, saying that the West is an empire of lies. America's an empire of lies. Well, if America's an empire of lies, you don't want to be lying either, because then you're the same as them, except you don't have quite the heft on the world stage. So it's really important for Russia to maintain a non-exaggerated position on things. And so this is why I believe while we don't have firm evidence of it yet, that it's reasonable. Other reasons why it's reasonable. We know that $486 billion was laundered through Ukraine. So you have to ask yourself, even after you pay out for Zelensky's 3 houses in London and, the one in Florida and God knows what's else, and, his, I'm going to get his name wrong. In fact, I'm not even going to say it. It starts with a K. He's a Ukrainian billionaire. He's known as being a really vicious thug, who's the person who promoted Zelensky. Even after they've gotten their cut, even after, 10% for the big guy got his cut, that's, even assuming that this money went all around the world to rig elections as it was supposed to have done, right? Most of this money was digital, by the way. There were pallets, but most of the money was digital. Okay, doesn't it stand to reason that some of this money would also be not just simply put in Ukraine's formal military, but would be put in the production of these biolabs and perhaps in a clandestine bioweapons and nuclear weapons program? Zelensky, the week before the invasion, said that Ukraine should consider revisiting the 1994 denuclearization of the country, which was really, by many commentators, seen as maybe the final straw for Russia to pull the trigger and invade. But, if you say something like that, they didn't maybe expect Russia to invade so rapidly, but it's the kind of comment that you make. Like, a nuclear weapons program takes years to develop. So if they were only months away from completing it, it might make more sense that they would say this stuff. And then by the time, not that I'm thinking that these people are actually engaging in a logical or reasonable manner. I'm just making the point that it seems like the kind of thing that you might mention you do after you've already started doing it. And that would certainly be a massive threat to Russia, right? Including these biolabs, which, as I had heard prior from 107, now seems to be being leaked out as confirmed that these labs were working on genetic, they were genetic bioweapons. And now I'm hearing information that the same thing might be true in Taiwan. I don't know anything about that. Cliff said that. I don't know where he's getting that from. We can talk about some of this stuff and about how it relates to Xi. And is Xi really a good guy? I don't know. I don't personally feel that way. I think that it's true that Xi double-crossed the globalists, but Xi is of his own cabal. And I think that Xi and Putin are simply working together because they both don't want like this globalist cabal for their own reasons. But, well, I actually think Putin, even though he's a ruthless guy, I think he's kind of realistic, reasonable person. I don't necessarily know if I feel that way about Xi. It's not really my sense. I have to probably check his energy a bit more, but from what I've seen of his energy, I just, communist China is a really horrendous place. Russia is not. Okay, it's not a horrendous place. I have good friends who are in Russia, and they have a great time, and they're enjoying their Russian women, and they love the country. That's not the case in China. China's a really, really horrible place to be. And so I'm skeptical of ever thinking Xi is a white hat or any of that crap that people put around. He's probably just self-interested. And he has his own designs on China being this global power. That's kind of what I think. And using Russia, he needs Russia in the meantime. Russia needs him. They don't like each other, but they work together. That's kind of how I see it playing out. So, at any rate, it's going to be very interesting to see how all this stuff plays out with the labs as more material emerges. I do think that we are going to see some crazy stuff. And now, look, I mean, just some more things with Ukraine, with Azov, and it's now becoming pretty much confirmed across the board that there's been shelling of civilian areas by the Ukrainians. To the extent the Russians have hit civilian areas, it's been because Ukrainians have placed equipment in schools. And there's now been 3 attempts to get a humanitarian corridor in Mariupol. And every single time, the Ukrainians have broken that. Now, Western media is not going to tell you that stuff. But if you're doubting what I'm saying, if you think I'm being a stooge, ask yourself from a very reasonable, logical perspective, why would the Russians shell humanitarian corridors? It doesn't make any sense. And on the other hand, the Ukrainians have every reason to shell humanitarian corridors and to block it because they're using civilians as human shields. If you had a city and there was no civilians in it, there was just Azov, how long do you think Azov was going to last against the Russians? They depend on civilians as to survive because that's the only reason the Russians hold back firepower. And by the way, just because the Russians are doing that, it doesn't mean that they're like, the best people in the world, super, that they're like, look, they would be doing this stuff simply because it's bad for their strategic agenda. You don't even have to ascribe some sort of humanitarian motive to it. Although I do actually think that exists because I do think that Putin views the Ukrainians, especially the ones in the south and the east, as being kindred people. But even if you want to throw out that and you think that's naive, just from a cynical standpoint, Russia has a really, really strong agenda and reason to minimize civilian casualties. Whereas the Ukrainians have a huge reason to pile them up. Because the more civilians that get killed, the better that they can agitate for NATO intervention in the conflict. if it comes clear that Russia's committing war crimes and ethnically cleansing and shelling civilian areas, then they can manufacture consent, which they always do, to try to expand the effort. And the reality is that if NATO doesn't get involved with the conflict, Ukraine's gone. So you got to think about this stuff logically. What it reminds me of is if you go back to the Syria conflict. Remember when Assad was, this was like maybe 2017, I think. Assad was pretty much winning the war at that point. It was almost over. And all of a sudden there's this big chemical attack, right? Assad drops chemical weapons and kills all these children. And everyone was like, wait a minute, what the fuck? Why would he do that? Why would Assad, who's about to win a war that's taken years, why would he just suddenly start dropping chemical weapons on children? And they're like, yeah, he did it. Now America has to go and invade. And thank God, Trump had good judgment and was able to see through this stuff and really mitigate it. I think he fired a couple of missiles at like random crap, didn't do anything serious with it. But they were trying to do their whole thing of manufacturing consent. But when you look at it, you have to ask yourself, why would the person they're claiming did this, why would they do it? What benefit do they have from it? Who benefits from it? You always ask, cui bono? Cui bono? And if somebody benefits from it, it doesn't mean that they're guilty. It doesn't mean that they're guilty, because they could benefit from it and they also didn't want to do it, because there could be multiple layers to it, right? For instance, here, did Russia want to invade Ukraine? Probably not. But will they benefit in the end from this whole thing? They might very well. They might very well see a massive expansion in their influence, right? They might become stronger for it. The West might become economically destroyed because of the sanctions because of it. They might get their old, lands back. But that is not enough to say for certain that Russia had a responsibility for it. Because there's other people who also benefit from it. So if you have multiple people benefiting from it, it can become a little bit more opaque. But if you have one side that benefits not at all from it, and one side that benefits a ton from it, and it happens, it's probably not the person who doesn't benefit at all from it, right? Now, let's look at this logic and apply the different layers. So you can say, well, why are people in the Ukrainian government, why is Zelensky doing these things? Because isn't it just going to get worse and worse? Well, that may be true for him, which is why, I don't know if you guys saw the video recently of him high on cocaine at the last negotiations 2 days ago. It's probably not very good for him personally, but he's not a free man. So who does it benefit above them? And this is where normies get lost. It's like, well, it's not good for the Ukrainian government. They wouldn't do that because they're going to stop existing. It's like, well, but what if the Ukrainian government didn't ever really exist? And what if the entire time it was owned by autocrats? There was some interesting stuff on the Duran, which is a good political commentary show. And they were talking about how, well, first off, the Ukrainians were dressed like thugs at the negotiation, like bouncers, got baseball caps, sleeve tats, versus the Russians who were dressed like regular diplomats, but that there were these phones on the table. And the question was, who were they talking to on the phone? I mean, were the Russians negotiating with the Ukrainians, or were they negotiating with Newland? Were they negotiating with Blinken? Were they negotiating with the United States? Who were they actually talking to? Because it didn't look like the people in that room were skilled negotiators. So this brings up all sorts of other questions, right? But obviously, at the end of the day, the Ukrainian people are suffering, and they're being psyoped, and they're being used, and it's a terrible thing. It's a really terrible thing. But you start to understand what you're dealing with here, that these people are holding the country hostage. They do not have the interests of the population at heart, and it's a delicate surgery for the Russians to walk. And but I think that they're advancing at a pretty steady pace, and we'll see where it goes. Now, let's transition to some. I'll actually check these comments real fast, and then I'll go into the economic part. So let's see here. Jeff. NATO was planning to launch a third world war using nuclear weapons against Russia, and the main role in this was given to the current American-dominated ruling elite in Ukraine and the nationalists, Azarov wrote. Yeah, that's a quote from what the Russians saying. Doesn't Soros have his tentacles in Ukraine as well? Yes, Soros does have his tentacles in Ukraine. It really is hard for people to imagine just how bad it was for the average people there. I mean, it's a huge human trafficking hub, massive amounts of money laundering. And if you want to get into more esoteric stuff around it, Ukraine is where Khazaria used to be. And if you guys are familiar with the Khazarian mafia, these are the people who are not Jews but infiltrated the Jewish network for political reasons, because they wanted to kind of play off between the Christians and the Jews. So this group converted. And Cliff goes into a whole thing about them as the name stealers. I think that the basic way to look at them is that they're just they're a demonic group, basically. They're an evil group that's into black magic, and they've immersed themselves within the Jewish community as well as other communities too over time. But they are a chameleon-like group that infiltrates others. So it's kind of interesting. You could say that this is Ukraine. Is it, a continuation of where things used to be? I don't really know about that stuff, to be honest. I think probably it's true. I just don't personally know details about it. Clandestine not, all right. Yep, it's the same old song and dance. So, and yeah, I have to admit, it's very frustrating to see people who just don't really get it. They don't get what's going on. They don't understand just the easy flip that the media went and took all of this energy that people had towards COVID and then put it now towards Ukraine. Everyone's now virtue signaling about Ukraine. And everybody's, excited to if not go to war, but to condemn Putin and to just suddenly imagine that there was nothing bad going on. There was no possible reason why this could have happened. Okay. Now, but let's look at the economic stuff. So we already talked about some of this stuff before, but what I think is important to understand is that right now, it doesn't seem like this has gotten to the point of oil embargo, oil sanctions. But I have to tell you guys, I'm going to be very surprised if there isn't some restrictions on oil and gas. The way that this insanity is going, it hasn't burnt itself out. It's probably going to keep accelerating, and 3/11 is a big date for this. Now, 3/11 has some serious significance. God, I'm blanking on the event. There was a very, very big event that happened on 3/11. Also, some of you guys know 3/11 was allegedly when the military declared Trump commander-in-chief, if you guys followed that stuff. After doing their internal review, the mirror of 11/3. But 3/11 is a big date, and it's also, interestingly enough, the date when Russia gets taken off of the SWIFT system. And so in the next 5 days, 4 days now, I guess, all these Russian service providers have to migrate to .ru because there is going to be, Russia's internet is going to be basically cut off from the rest of the world. And their financial system is going to be cut off from the rest of the world. There's going to be back channels and stuff like that. But the point is, this has never happened before. Expect some serious chaos to ensue. And what I don't think people understand is just how bad it's going to get economically in the West, especially if you're in Europe. I really don't know what to tell you guys in Europe. I really hope you stocked up. I hope you stocked up on food. I hope you stocked up on fuel, although understand you can't really stock up on fuel that long because it degrades. I heard from my friends in the oil biz, it's 6 months. The price of gas has gone up 10 cents a day. 10 cents a day over the last week. So last COVID cabal, we were at 347, and now the lowest I'm seeing is 415. So lowest before was around 340 something, now lowest is around 410. It's going to keep going up. I've seen plenty of 3-4. I mean, I have to tell you guys, in New Jersey, I've never seen that. New Jersey, by the way, New Jersey it's less subsidized than it used to be, but New Jersey is a gas subsidized state. So we're really not used to seeing high gas prices. People on the West Coast are going to get clobbered. But we're actually importing, I think only 3%, but we're importing Russian oil in the States. You should definitely expect, by the time this is over, to see $10 per gallon gas. It's going to be massive political instability. But that's just America. I mean, Western Europe, Michelin is already shutting down some plants because they can't get the materials. People don't realize how many raw materials Russia was exporting. It's not even just energy, but it's all the things combined. I mean, they're going to shut down those plants, so people are unemployed, then all their cost of living stuff goes up. So if you start having a situation like this where inflation starts getting out of control because there's a real supply shock, not like a fabricated money printing inflation thing, that there's really a supply shock, then what's going to happen in Europe? Well, you might see Germany do what it traditionally does, which is raise interest rates. So Germany starts to raise interest rates. But other countries in Europe are not going to be able to do that. You know, smaller countries aren't going to be able to do it, like Greece, Portugal, Slovakia. But I mean, Italy and France are certainly not going to do that. They're big countries. And so are you going to see the collapse of the Eurozone as a result of this? You really very, very well could see it. I also think, by the way, and thank you for mentioning this in the comments, Book, once this internet separation happens in the next week, I think we can expect some serious cyber warfare to go on. Serious cyber warfare to start happening. And I think it's going to be a false flag thing. But it's going to be pretty wild. It's going to be pretty wild. So what to expect after it? Well, I think things are going to accelerate very, very rapidly from here. I mean, can you guys really believe right now we're 2 weeks tomorrow, not even, we're 2 weeks on Wednesday from the invasion. I mean, how much has changed in not even 2 weeks? Talk about a time dilation. I mean, you know, we talk about when we have to do the next COVID cabal. It's like the COVID cabals were based on how much things are changing. You know, we could go a month. Stuff happens in half a week that took a month before. It's moving really, really quickly. So, buckle up. Buckle up. And by the way, I have to tell you guys this. It's very important. If you guys are in crypto, really make sure, really make sure that you guys have most of your crypto on hardware wallets. Okay. I don't personally have any, but I personally don't have any, but make sure you don't have any hardware. Make sure if you do have it, you have it on a hardware wallet, because Coinbase just froze 25,000 accounts in Russia with crypto. If you don't think that stuff is going to come domestically to you after what you saw in Canada, you are naive. Don't be naive. Don't be naive. There's going to be freezing of stuff. I've said this for ages. Okay, crypto on hardware, cash, physical cash, some precious metals. You're in good shape. You'll get through it. Have some supplies. Any one of those things is going to be okay. All of them is best. just because you don't know where things are going to go, and you want to make sure your bases are covered. Yeah, well, look, Coinbase or Clownbase is not a really good place to be on. The only exchange that I even like to use is Kraken. Um, and the CEO proved that a little bit ago back during the Canada stuff, where he said basically, you got to take your stuff off of our exchange because we can't do anything to prevent it. But when they come down, they're going to go after all that stuff. Everybody's going to get hit. So, do you guys have some questions? Any cues for me today? Any questions? A lot of what we have to be aware of right now is just our leadership positions too, and really pointing out to people the insanity of what's going on. You know, it's I don't think that the American people are going to stand very long for this stuff happening, especially with now Wisconsin on the verge of decertifying, from what I hear. Trump's talking more about it. I wonder if there's some element of timing here, maybe waiting until Truth Social is in better condition. I don't know. Don't know if China's going to invade Taiwan in April or if that's something for the distant future. I think if it doesn't happen in April, it might not happen for years. But guys, hit me with some questions if you guys got any questions. Otherwise, I'll just sign off, because things just keep moving forward. To keep moving forward. I mean, look, this is what we were looking for. We were looking for some excitement. We were looking for another phase. That's what we're getting. Phil Godlovsky, I think you mentioned him before. No, I'll have to check him out. Will there be a Gulf of Tonkin moment that gets the U.S. military involved? Good question, Roman. I do believe that that's going to happen. I think that there's going to be a false flag in the cyber realm. That's what I think is going to happen. Whenever NATO said like a week ago that a cyber attack against a NATO nation would be considered a trigger for Article 5. So that is a pretty good indication for me that they're going to declare Article 5. So I think we'll have this situation where the two countries will be officially at war, so to speak. I don't know how much actual physical skirmishes will happen as a result of that, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's some of it. But I don't personally believe there will be anything beyond that. But we will feel for a period of time like we're about to get nuked. There's going to be a nuclear war. But I can tell you, I do not think that the United States... Look, we said this before. I don't think Biden has access to the nukes. And I can tell you, even if you say 2/3 of the American public right now are anti-Putin, pro-Ukraine, half of that group is not pro-intervention in Ukraine. So you're not going to get, like America, there's no appetite for people to get involved in Ukraine. There's no appetite at all for people to get involved in Ukraine. The conservatives, there's some who are always kind of willing to, I gotta, stop the bad guys, kind of stupid shit. But for the most part, people are just done with it. And they're either wise to the whole thing like we are, or they're adopting the position of, well, look, Putin's a dick, but we're not getting involved. And by the way, Biden's an idiot because they caused this stuff. They can say Putin's a bad guy, but Biden's an idiot and we're not getting involved. Like, that's the normie opinion right now. So people are burned out. I don't watch Lori Lott anymore. She's sweet. She's good. It's just kind of felt like I was hearing the same thing over and over again. I didn't. That's a pattern in spirituality communities where it's like, wow, the energy coming in is so crazy. Wow, the energy coming in is so crazy. Wow, the energy is so crazy today. Wow, you hear that energy today? Today is a day we can really release things. This new energy lets us release things. It's the same shit over and over again. Doesn't mean it's not nice. And I think if you're at a certain point, it can be good to hear it. Like I know last spring, this time, I was listening to Lori Lott a lot. And, I appreciated it. But eventually I was just kind of like, you kind of get your fill of a teacher and you move on. Yeah, there's some of that stuff too. Let's see here. CABAL meetup when where? I will throw a huge party when this is all over. I'm gonna throw a huge party when this is all over. But we're gonna wait till the end of the story before we celebrate. That's my perspective. Significance of and it's going to be a big party, guys. I mean, you're not going to want to miss it. I'll give you guys notice. I'll drop some serious cash on it. And you guys are all invited if you want to come. Significance of HRC appearing more often recently. I think the reason for that is twofold. The first is that, I'll just say the main reason is because Durham's getting closer to her. And so it behooves her from a PR standpoint. Remember, all these guys do is PR, okay? It's all they do is PR. Biden putting out like a decree, and there wasn't even an executive order. It was just a PR statement. Everybody has to now do this. A lot of, this is an important thing to wake up to, is that a lot of what the government's saying is PR. And do they genuinely have the power to enforce a lot of this stuff? It remains to be seen. They have a really, really big mouthpiece, but a very limited scope to be able to hammer down, especially in the States. Maybe not, even Canada, there was some institutional resistance to what Trudeau was doing. And Canada really doesn't have anywhere remotely close to the protections of the United States. So I think a lot of the reason that she's out in the spotlight is because, if you're arresting someone who's going to be running for president, then it looks worse, right? And it creates more division and tension. Oh, they're, going to arrest a political opponent. I mean, it doesn't work quite so well that Trump's not in power, but it works a little bit. However, I think maybe the bigger reason is more of an esoteric thing. Their timeline was contingent on Hillary being elected in 2016. And if you understand from this esoteric standpoint, what they're constantly trying to do is they're trying to go back and correct the timeline. What I've heard a lot is that a lot of what the timeline correction is getting Trump out of it entirely. That Trump is this sort of virus that fucked up their timeline. And they need to go back to it. Remember, Hillary Clinton's plan, there was going to be a nuclear war. I've heard two versions of this. One had to do with North Korea liquidating a city, and then everything was going to kind of fall apart from that. I've also heard of more of a bigger war with Russia. Probably there was a plan A and plan B. It doesn't really matter. The point is that with Hillary in control, they would have had their big takedown of America plan that would have involved nuclear, biological, and economic collapses, right, across this country. And that the population would have supported a lot of these things. You remember during Trump's term at the Guatemalan Cultural Center in Los Angeles, there was this was a huge thing, but it was really silenced up in the media, that in the middle of Los Angeles, there was special operations forces. They said, oh, it's a train exercise. It wasn't a train exercise. It was live fire stuff right in the middle of Los Angeles. And it was nuclear bomb squad. Dealing with a live nuke in the city. They were still trying to go ahead with this plan. If you also recall, during the time that this was going on, Pelosi was trying to get out of the country so she'd have plausible deniability. And she was trying to use government airplanes for that, for like a family trip. And Trump wouldn't give her the air travel, right? Wouldn't let her fly on a government plane. The point of all this stuff is that they've been trying to get back to this timeline, resort it out. So you could see it from a certain perspective. If they could get Hillary back in 2024, then everything would return, everything would reset to the way it was supposed to be. Some ideas to consider. Will election theft ever go public mainstream acceptance? Yeah, it will go public mainstream acceptance. It's going to be impossible to deny in the coming months. And that's where we're going with it. But a lot of the public pacing, it's coming. You can look at a lot of this stuff going on. I mean, there's multiple reasons why they're doing it, but it also tries to distract from that stuff. But the flip side is that as they do this stuff, people become more receptive to it. Okay, you're somebody and you think, well, I don't know if I don't think that she stole the election. I don't think that Biden stole the election. Like I don't know. I have a hard time believing that. That seems like a stretch. And then your gas prices quadruple, your food prices quadruple, your company lays you off, you're at the brink of nuclear war, and then maybe all of a sudden you start to think, you know what, maybe he did steal the election. And that's how human psychology works. If you like someone, you don't want to believe something bad about them. If you don't like somebody, you'll believe something bad about them, especially when the evidence is very compelling. So the programming will ultimately break. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot more pain because people there's still this last barrier of people who just can't get it. For whatever reason, they just can't put the pieces together. And look, maybe they'll never put the pieces together on their own. But as this stuff progresses, we will be there to, they're not going to be in the way anymore, at least. Let's put it that way. CBDC is coming soon. Yeah, it's part of when they collapse these economies, they're going to, and I've heard some things. Another reason that I talk about having physical cash is that there is a plan to actually wipe out bank accounts. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but a few days back, last weekend actually, there was an issue with USAA, which is like the main sort of banking provider for most military Americans and their families, and it just was wiped out for like 24, 48 hours. Now, okay, technical glitch, no big deal, back online, but I'm wondering if that was like a test run for some things, because if you're going to try to get rid of your crimes, okay, you have a cyber warfare thing with Russia. Oh my God, Russia wiped out all of our banking systems. We can't use digital banking anymore. We have to move to the blockchain, which is immune from cyber attacks. And you can see right there how they can use that as the argument to bring in CBDCs. It seems like a plausible possibility, that they're certainly going to use the war stuff with Russia to bring all this stuff on. I don't think people are going to accept it, but that's how they're going to try to do it. And they're going to have to give people a reason to move on to it. And the reason is going to have to be something along the lines of digital banking isn't secure enough. So we need a blockchain one, and we need also our currency got messed up, so we need a central bank on the blockchain to regulate it all. And people are not going to understand the implications of that. But I actually do think that people will. Like, we're talking about it right now. It hasn't even happened yet. Okay, we're doing our own predictive programming. Let's keep going down here. Will the party be thrown after part 1 or after part 2, Elon Musk? I am looking at 2023 or 2024 for that. Yeah. And look, I think the war goes on till 2024, but then I think that's just the war against the cabal. My sense is that there'll be some crap with China, probably like 2027. I just know that we don't get to the end of all this stuff, the end to all this stuff, until we get to the 2030s, and maybe when we say end, like new age completely, 2040s. But 2030s are like the golden age, when we're building the golden age. Like it's like the 1950s, right? I mean, you had World War II, and then you had the second half of the 1940s. There was a lot of aftermath instability from that really lasted. I think you could really fairly say it lasted till 52, right? So it's like you had a decade of peace in the most of the 50s and early 60s before then they got to the next decade's problems, the next generation's problems. But World War II, I mean, if you want to go through the whole arc of World War II, you're really looking at a 20-year period from 1933 to 1952. And so if right now we are at 1942, right? This is 1942, it's 2022, it's 1942. You can look at this and you can say, we're not going to have some semblance of stability. We're not going to have everything sorted until 2032, maybe, let's say. Reasonable to think about it like that. But the crux of the war is going to be over, 2024, 2025, right? Maybe you could say that. And then there'll be some aftershock effects. If you were living in America, we tend to think of post-World War II as mostly this wonderful time period. And, we had to go to Korea, but in Europe, I mean, they were still transferring populations into the 1950s. Like, Europe was economically wiped out as a result of World War II. Populations were all over the place. All the infrastructure buildings were destroyed. People were starving. I mean, that's why we had the Marshall Plan. Please be, realistic and expect something similar to occur this time around. I'm not saying that level of human suffering, but I mean, we saw the first papers of the Pfizer documents. We also saw a couple of plane crashes and helicopter crashes in the States recently. I mean, Cliff talks about this stuff. We're not paying attention to it because we're focused on the war, but all that safety shit is really starting to come out now. I mean, no coincidence they start dropping it after the war starts, trying to bury it. It's bad. It's really, really bad. Indications that the fertility issues also are not necessarily in that person, but they're for the next generation. So if they have children, their children are going to be infertile. All sorts of things that are going to go down, the line. I mean, there's just so much stuff. Like, I almost don't even read it anymore because it's like someone finds out a new horror story about it, a new thing. And it's like, I kind of get the gist at this point. Like, it's bad. Cancer rates are up. We're just going to have to maneuver it. But yeah, war ends in the next 2 to 3 years, but we're going to have a whole decade of rebuilding. You can't let Durham get too close to HRC. He'll need a shower. We can be our own cabal. No. We're not a cabal. Everything out in the we got to be out in the open, We can't be doing these dark secrets in closed rooms. I mean, look, I do think that it's important to have private brotherhoods and stuff like that. But we got to part with some of those old ways with rituals and whatnot. All right. Any thoughts on the new variant, Omicron B? I honestly just saw a tweet about that this evening, and I have no idea what it's about. So probably we'll talk about that more on next show. I'm hearing it's quite bad. Maybe only for the vax. I don't know. To be honest. HRC raised funds for Haiti too. Nothing but an excuse for human trafficking, blowing up the Clinton Foundation. 100%. 100%. Well, COVID's over for now, but then they'll go back to the next one, right? They had to ease off the pandemic stuff, then they'll come back to it. They'll build up the pressure again. Now people are dying, we go back. Why do the elites want a full-on collapse when the breakdown of systems will affect all of them as well? So it's a good question. The way to look at it is that as parasites, they inevitably kill everything that they latch onto. So it's not that the breakdown of the systems will affect them, but the system's breaking down because of them. So it's kind of like you cover your crimes and you move on to the next one. For instance, with the United States, why do they want to crash the United States? Well, because they looted it so much that there was no way, in their estimation, that they could fix it. So, per Catherine Austin Fitts, there was actually, this is like incredible to believe, but it puts a lot of things into perspective. She had found out about this in 98, and this journalist was, she was talking to this journalist. I'm fast forwarding through some stuff, whatever. You can watch some of her interviews if you want to find out more about it. She's mentioned it a couple times in interviews, but this reporter had all the goods on all the stolen money. Basically, about 20 trillion had gone to the Pentagon off books, and 1 trillion had gone to HUD, Housing and Urban Development. All basically embezzled money that was laundered that was basically moved off country, off budget, and that we picked up the debt for. But actually that money went and disappeared. So all that was going on. Catherine Austin Fitts said this journalist was going to break the whole story on it. They had gotten all the details, got all the documents. She was going to break the story. Guess when she was going to break the story? September 11th, 2001. And everybody knows the whole things about Building 7 and the other office building nearby that was, collapsed or destroyed in it. That had all the financial records. So, and then the part of the Pentagon that was doing an investigation into this money that had allegedly gone to the Pentagon but disappeared off record, that was the part of the Pentagon that got hit. So the point here is that the system is collapsing because of their greed. And they need to have a reason they have to try to cover it up so no one looks for it, right? Oh, well, the reason America's in debt is because of the war on terror. We had to go after the terrorists. No, the country was already in debt, but then they blew it up even more, and then they the financial crisis. So they keep creating more problems, and then there's a reaction. They divert to a new problem. Problem, reaction, solution stuff. So that's what they're going to try to do right now, and so they collapse their own system that they collapsed themselves. So they collapsed their system, but then they make it seem like something else collapsed it. So right now, everybody with a brain knew that there was inflation going on. The Fed was printing money at a crazy rate. There was no way to salvage it. It was done. But rather than let it burn out on its own, maybe in a year or two, when everybody would know for sure it was them, even the most dumb normie would know that the Fed and everything around it was broken, and that these people had crashed it. They create a war with Russia, and then the war with Russia gives them the pretense to say, oh, well, this is the reason why it happened. It's Russia is the reason that the economy collapsed. We put these sanctions on Russia. Oh no, now there's massive, supply shocks, so the prices are up. It wasn't us, it was Russia. It's the same shit. Same shit over and over again. The elites have their bunkers and entourages. They're well insulated. Yeah, well, for now. Just recently learned that Pelosi is 81-year-old or something. What the fuck? She must be a top baby eater. She likes her ice cream. True, but the infrastructure still requires other systems that will be affected. Long-term power generation, food, clean energy. The normie cognitive dissonance will be really tough to overcome, going to have to be overwhelming. I totally agree. I mean, honestly, I'm not black pilled over it or anything, but I overestimated. I know it gets more difficult as you go. You know, you have to break through deeper and deeper levels of programming, but it is really just incredible at and they're look, I want to emphasize, I'm not talking about the really like bad, evil people, hateful people. I mean just like good people, but they just can't seem to get it. They can't seem to see it. And it's like, and then of course there's different levels of awareness with it. I mean, people say, oh, they're just incompetent. Well, they're incompetent, but they're also not incompetent in the sense that whoever's giving them orders to destroy their own countries, like, it's coming from on top. These people they're not smart, but they understand what they're doing. They understand, okay, they have to do this, and then they're like, fuck, oh my God, it's going to be so bad. And they freak out about how they can avoid it being blamed on them, but they still follow their marching orders and they do these things. Contrast how U.S. Western governments are operating versus Putin, who's very much in control of things, very much logically parsing things. When he gives speeches, he's like referencing histories and explaining stuff. When people in the West go up and talk, they say, our values, we need freedom, our values. There's nobody there. There's nobody there making decisions or explaining decisions. They're just like actions that are taken. And then they throw some PR in there about how they're good people and other people are bad. And because we have an Avengers population, a population of people who is literally grows up on superheroes. And look, I'm sorry if you like the movies. I'm just saying it has coincided with the inability of people to look at things critically, like Putin. I mean, you can accept that Putin is a ruthless man who killed and imprisoned people to get in the power. Okay, you can totally accept that. Somebody who has crushed down dissent violently at home. You can accept all that stuff. But that doesn't necessarily make him the bad guy, given what other things are going on, given who he's fighting against. You have to, and you can look at those actions and then you can maybe even look at them from the higher perspective. Well, is his approach one that, our Western, the way we like to look at ourselves, which is bullshit. The way we like to look at ourselves and about freedom, etc. Is it nice? No, it's not. But is he protecting his population from greater evils? It's arguable. I mean, certainly on a cultural level, they're not as rotted as we are at this point. I mean, it's bad over here. I would prefer someone like Trump, though, and I prefer the Constitution to a fucking autocrat, but let's see here. Isn't it amazing how the COVID narrative just vanished in New York and CIA getting rid of vaccine mandates? Well, look, they are, but I was going to go to New York this weekend, but I'm going to actually stay across the river just because a lot of these restaurants are still enforcing it. And I'm just not, I'm not about that. And also, the city is pricey as fuck. Now there's a destination tax. I mean, it's just such a terribly run city. So maybe I'll check it out in April when the weather's better. March isn't a great month in New York. April is. So April, May, June. So I might do a little visiting during that time period, especially April, because May and June I tend to hit the beach. How are they going to prove the election was stolen beyond reasonable doubt? I mean, they've already proven that in my perspective, but there's more and more stuff coming out, man. And the way to, there's a lot of ways to forensically analyze these things. You can look at the ballots themselves and see that they're cut differently. 16 people voted from the same address. There's all sorts of forensic things you can do, and you can tackle it from the nature of the ballots themselves, the people who voted on the ballots, when ballots were received. You saw in Wisconsin, for instance, in the nursing homes, you had 95 to 100% people in nursing homes across Wisconsin voted. Excuse me, that doesn't happen. That's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Insane. And so you have also statistical methodology to deal with this stuff. And then on the electronic front, you can see a computer code that was maybe repeated that moves votes around. And that's now been detected in multiple different jurisdictions. I understand a lot of people haven't seen this stuff. It's buried. To be honest, I think a lot of these individuals in these cases moving forward, and there's hundreds of them, over 100 at least, I think that at this juncture, it's not bad that they're not getting a lot of press, because you kind of want it to happen at the right moment. You want everything to be really developed rather than to have it kind of come out as a deflated thing like what happened with Arizona, right? Where they can kind of mess the narrative up around it. So I'm not sure if the evidence was destroyed across the board in most states, although I will agree that it's likely that we'll never know the exact numbers. But we'll certainly know that it was stolen, and we'll know which states for sure flipped. So, there wasn't that big of a margin of victory. So, I mean, you'd only have to really decertify, change 2 states, and then everything would flip. But if you can get a couple ones to do that, even if you don't know the exact margin, and so with those bets, maybe we just ask for our money back. If you made any margin bets, maybe just ask for your money back on those ones rather than get the winnings. Maybe you're a little bit more reasonable with these betting companies. But yeah, I also did hear the military recorded in real time. We'll see. There's always a sweeping up phase after every military campaign. I expect readjustment time after transition. All right, I gotta slide down here. Do you think people will riot, rebel over the vaccine side effects, data, and fallout? 100% I do. 100% I do. NAC Oat TTV. I'll look to see if I can find it. I just see so much crap all the time. I mean, guys, I see so much stuff. It's really tough for me to keep track of it. I'm not like an archivist. There's some people who just archive. It's not really good for me. The Pfizer docs are really horrifying. It's unbelievable just how many pages too. Like, I think it was 9 pages, completely single spaced, back to back to back, like no breaks in the sentences of all the different side effects. Like, unbelievable. Yeah. The ads don't even reference preventing transmission, only protection from serious illness and death. Yeah. The day after Rumsfeld said 3 trillion was missing. All right, let's see here. I wonder if the effects are reversible. I've heard that. I've heard a couple of different things, and this is why it's important to, don't hold any of this stuff with dogma. We know it's bad. We don't know how bad. We don't know. We just don't know. And we don't know if it's the same for everybody. It seems like a lot of people's immune systems could deal with it. The more you get, the worse it is. I've heard it takes 4 to complete the program, so to speak. This is where you get into like the AI stuff. I really don't know. I don't know. I mean, Magenta has her own info about the children, and she literally said, I can't talk about it for my own safety right now. And, you could say, oh my God, somebody says that stuff. But you know what? That's not like her. It's not like her. So it sounds like it's pretty profound. So we'll see what the story is with that. No widespread fraud. Yeah. Let's see here. Yep. Well, guys, this was a good show, longer than I thought it would be, but we had a lot to talk about. Good questions. I appreciate it all. Um, Rainbow currency, Jeff. Anyway, we'll be in touch. We'll see if we're in touch before the magic 311 day. You know, we got 311, then we got 315 Ides of March, then we got the spring solstice. A lot of crazy stuff coming up. March Madness, as they say. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. I love you all.